Hello everyone and welcome for this new episode of Teach Yourself to Draw, a drawing series focused on self-education. And in this episode we are going to talk about the basics of perspective. Alright, so let's just start. There are a couple of notions that you need to know if you want to understand perspective. The first one is the horizon line. So this line is imaginary. It's not necessarily the same line as the actual horizon line. The horizon line is technically the line of the eye level. Depending on where you place the horizon line on your sheet of paper, if you place it very high, it will make it look like you're really high up in, like, almost in the sky above the buildings. And if you place your horizon line very low, it will make it look like you're almost on the ground looking from below. So you can see that already the placement of the horizon line is a very important thing, and you have to really think about it because it definitely changes the composition depending on how high you place it. After that, the second notion is the notion of vanishing point. Basically, the vanishing point is an imaginary point in which all the parallel lines seem to converge. So technically, perspective is mostly for drawing buildings and drawing man-made things where you have parallel lines and perpendicular lines. If you don't have any of these lines, like let's say in natural landscape with only trees and mountains, this type of geometrical perspective is not going to necessarily be very useful. It will apply though, the same rules will apply, but since you don't have any parallel lines, it will not necessarily be very important. And something like aerial perspective, which is a more chromatic perspective, is going to be much more useful. But for architecture, buildings, rooms, this geometric perspective is a key. The idea is just that all the parallel lines appear to converge on the vanishing point. Alright, so I'm going to do one demonstration and you can follow along if you want. You can find the resources on my website, and the demonstration that I'm going to do is a one-point perspective. You have to know that you have three types of perspective. So one-point perspective is a perspective that only has one vanishing point. So let's say that one of the face of the building is flat in front of you, or one of the walls of the room is in front of you. You also have 2 points perspective with two vanishing points on the horizon line. And in this case, you're looking at an angle, so this way you have 2 points. And the last one is 3 points perspective when you have three vanishing points. This is often used when you have a very high building that you are looking from below or from above, and if you have a lot of distortion, like you're looking very high up, and you would in this case need 3 points perspective. Now, before we move on, I just need to tell you that this type of video is only possible thanks to the support that I get on Patreon. So I really need to thank all my patrons for the amazing support. If you want to join the community, you'll have access to exclusive content, real-time videos, and a lot more. And if you can't, or if you don't want to join this Patreon community, just know that there are things that you can do that will help me a lot, like leaving a like, sharing, or commenting to let YouTube know that this video is worth watching. Alright, that's it for this little break, and let's go back to the video. Alright, so I'm going to show you a strategy that I use to draw an imaginary building with decent proportions. I'm going to draw a grid on the ground and kind of make sure that this entire grid follows the perspective and make all the points converge to the vanishing point. I also try to extend my grid and make sure that it covers the entire surface of the ground, And for that, I extend the lines on the other side of the drawing board, and I use the fact that I can draw on this board, and I can even erase if I need it later, but I don't really care. And this is a good trick because most of the time the sheet of paper is going to be too small to measure accurately and connect all the lines to the vanishing points. Alright, so now I just need to draw all the lines that are parallel to the horizon line. But the thing is, I don't know the distance between all these lines. And if I want to create squares on the floor, I need to make sure that they all have the same proportions. So what I'm going to do is first imagine a big rectangle on the floor and draw a diagonal. And then I'm going to follow this diagonal and put a little mark on every crossing section with all the lines that I've previously drawn. So this step is kind of long and tedious, but it's also very important if you want to be precise in your architecture. You want everything to be uniform. If you don't want things to become too narrow or too wide in the distance, you want to keep track of this grid and how objects become progressively smaller as they go towards the distance. Now at some point it becomes so small that I don't even draw it anymore, and I just keep it like this. And once I have this entire grid in perspective, I'm going to use, just like tiling on the floor, I'm going to use this grid on the floor to decide the size of, I don't know, the columns, the stairs. And this is kind of tedious. This is a very long, slow process, but this is the most accurate one if you want to build some kind of complex architecture. If you just want very basic perspective, just a vanishing point and a horizon line will be enough. But if you want to go in more detail and create more ornaments, you want to draw a complete grid. And as you can see, I'm using a T-square ruler, and I'm putting the T-square ruler on the top of my drawing board, which guarantees that all my vertical lines will be parallel, which is a great help because, again, you don't want your buildings to look wobbly and unstable, so all the lines have to be parallel. Alright, so just to show you how I use the grid on the floor, every time I have to draw a door and I want all the doors to be exactly, to have exactly the same width. So I'm going to count how many squares I have in between, and I'm going to count the empty squares, and this allows me to measure how wide are the columns, how wide are the doors. If I didn't have this grid, it would be just estimating with the naked eye, and it can work, but it can also be very imprecise. Now about all the shapes that are not straight and that are not actual rectangles or squares, like triangles or even circles, the vaults, the arcs, all these shapes. Actually, the trick is it's not very simple, but is always the same. Is first you draw a square or a rectangle and you put this shape in perspective first, and then you put your triangle or your circle or your arc and you include it within the square that is already in the perspective, and from there you will have the shape that's actually in perspective, and it's not going to be distorted. It's going to follow the perspective and still keep the right shape. Like this is the thing that I did with the arcs. And again, it's always a good trick to count the distances using the grid and make sure that all the shapes are geometrically harmonious, so to say. And for complex buildings with curves, this can help a lot. So whenever you have a doubt and you don't know exactly how to put any type of shape in perspective, just first draw the square and include the shape, the random shape that you want within the square, and you're good to go. Alright, so as you can see, every time I place a line, I try to connect it to my vanishing point, and everything I do has to be connected. I never do anything without connecting it to the vanishing point. And this is a slow process, and you have to be very careful, very precise. But if you do that well, it should work really well and create a great impression already with just a couple of simple lines and simple details. And from there, you can be as imaginative as you want. You can create the ideal city if you want, like the artist of the Renaissance, or you can create more modern buildings or anything. I don't necessarily use geometric perspective that much in my drawings because I don't draw or paint that many buildings, but it's still an important set of skills to have. And if you want to draw any type of architecture at some point, you will need geometric perspective. Alright, that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Before you go, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if it's not already the case. And you can also check out my Patreon and join the community there to learn even more and get exclusive content. I'll see you for the next video, and until then, have fun drawing. Bye.